This episode of Gather and Go is brought to you by Visit Atlantic City. Live to explore in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Atlantic City welcomes one and all to the seaside destination where local spirits are connected and the celebrations are unforgettable. Learn more at visitatlanticcity.com.
All right, everybody. My guest today is a student tour operator who left a career in electrical engineering to join his family's company, Four Winds Tours and Travel, which takes more than 20,000 students on music and education tours in the U.S. and abroad every year. He's also on the board of the Student and Youth Travel Association, where he works closely with researchers to produce the Business Barometer and track industry trends. Gaurav Namit, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Brian. Happy to be here.
I'm so glad to have you here. I hear almost every month these days about how important student and youth travel is to our industry. There seems to be some buzz about it everywhere I go. People are asking about it. I'm meeting tour operators who are, interested in maybe dipping their foot in that pool. So I'm really glad to have you here today because you have a long career, a long family history in student travel, and we're going to unpack a lot of the trends and the experiences and stuff like that. But before we do, I want to know, number one, how your family got into the travel business, and then what made you decide to join them after trying your hand at some other things.
My mom always gets embarrassed when I tell this story, but basically when my mom was much, much, much younger, she was a special education teacher in India for second graders. And then after that, she started a career for a little while as a travel agent, basically issuing tickets back when issuing tickets was, a lot more arduous than it is today.
Right.
And then, her and my dad got married, they'd moved to the States. My dad was already based here. My mom moved over, and my mom didn't work for a while. And I think I was kind of a bratty kid. And I think I was like 10 or 11 one day. My mom told me to do a chore. And, as a bratty kid would, I told my mom to do it. And she said, why should I do it? I'm like, well, you don't work. So like, what else do you have to do all day? And on that day, my mom I kind of regret saying that now because my mom's really stuck to it over the last 30 years. But she basically said, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to go out and get a job. And so then she did. She worked at some temp jobs around Long Island where we were living at the time, where I grew up. And she didn't really like it, and she didn't really know what to do. And she went on a trip to Mexico with her cousin, my aunt, who was running a luxury travel agency into India, and just talked about ideas. And, the idea that like my mom's always loved kids. She's always loved education. She's always loved travel. Why doesn't she combine them? So she did. And Four Winds was started. The name kind of comes from the four cardinal directions. There's like four directions on a compass. So we will take you anywhere the winds can blow you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's back of our house, kind of classic startup story, right? Making phone calls that she pulled from the white pages and yellow pages, and whoever she could get on the phone, try to figure out if they're going on trips. And it was, I love the end of it was she had a list of about 30 schools that she put together after a couple of months of setting things up. But back then, setting up businesses wasn't clicking buttons, right? Like you had to file paperwork. There was all sorts of process. My dad helped her a lot with that. He was running a mortgage consulting business back then. And she got to about 25 on the list and nothing was happening. And she was like, you know what? I think this, it was a fun experiment, but I don't think this is going to work. And my dad looked at her and said, look, you made this list. You have 5 schools left. Just call them. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. And she got to the second to last one on that list, and that was our first client. And that school still travels with us today.
That is amazing. Not only because of the tenacity, the lesson in tenacity, but also that you still have that client 30 years later. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, it's that school still travels with us. That client actually passed away. He became a very close friend of my mom. And, the person that took over has now been with us. He was with us for about 14 years, and the new person's been with us about 16. So the new client from that school always tells my mom that like I'm actually been with you longer than Larry. So Yeah. And then the story about me is, I was exposed to travel a lot as a kid from my parents. Growing up in India, the way they did, travel was always this luxury dream. It's like all they could ever imagine. Like, how great would it be to one day go see the world? And when they got the means, it's all they could ever do. And so I was exposed to it a lot as a kid. My background, as you said, was in electrical engineering. I used to do semiconductor design, and the other part of the company really started a lot around music. I played a lot of music as a kid in middle school, high school programs, even in college. And Four Winds did a lot of music trips, band trips, marching bands, jazz bands, orchestras, choirs. And in a lot of ways, the music and travel have been such an integral part of my life that it makes sense that I fell in here. Practically, I didn't really see that as a future path when I was younger. I think my parents didn't necessarily even want that for me. They wanted me to sort of continue to carve. I think I had much more passion for academia and solving problems, technical problems and things like that. And, it was 10 years ago, 11 years ago now. I was in between companies and mom was getting older, as moms do. And she didn't really know what she would do with it, and I think this happens a lot for small businesses in general, in any trade. The travel industry, I think, is littered with so many small businesses. We probably see a lot more of it than maybe some others. But so I thought, like, okay, I'm not in a job right now. I am going to, let's see what it looks like to do something with it. And I came in, and then it was going pretty well, and then COVID really shook things up. So, and that was a time where there was a lot of searching for me if this was the right path, like really looking forward, because getting through COVID was one thing, but then rebuilding from COVID has been its own journey. And I did have a lot of time to think, as I think a lot of us in the industry did. And I found, like I said, there's a lot of intersections to this industry that fit a lot of things I'm very passionate about: education, music, travel. And there was a lot of ways that this was going to go forward, and being able to be part of shaping that in our small piece. It felt like a journey I wanted to take and see where it would go. And that's sort of how we got here.
Yeah. So, student travel is important. Can you help us wrap our minds around how important or why it's so important, and maybe, why there's a growing attention on this part of our ecosystem?
Student travel is important. I'd argue it's the most important. I think student travel serves a lot of different functions for the travel industry, and for other industries. I think educationally, there's a ton of work and research that's gone out there to talk about how study abroad programs have impacted youth's careers, the impact of travel on lower income students, the impact of travel on communities that are marginalized, the impact on diverse communities less diverse communities to see diversity. I think that educationally we provide such an impetus for so many different segments that adds to the travel component, which is on top of the programmatic or the educational component. And this doesn't even get into sports and other types of other angles of travel. I think the industry has shifted a lot. I think attention to student travel 50 years ago was looked at as a massive luxury, but I think travel was also looked at as a massive luxury.
Yeah.
And as that price has become more affordable, as travel has become more normalized, student travel has become more critical. I think one of the things about the student travel industry, one of the reasons I prefer our space to the larger travel industry, has always been, in a sense, we're a little bit more recession proof because we're not a luxury item. A lot of our trips are not necessarily at the same price point as luxury travelers, but our trips are things that families feel a lot more dedicated to fundraising for, things that schools set budgets for, things that governments set aside funding for, there's grants for. What that means is, regardless of how you may not want to do the $10,000 safari trip with your family this summer. But if your kid's got a DC trip, that feels a lot more affordable and a lot more integral, not just to his travel experience, but his educational experience. So I think these avenues of course sort of created a way that the student travel industry is getting more visibility. Coming into and out of COVID, I mean, 2020 trend wise was looking like the largest student travel year in history. Obviously, it wasn't, of course. But I think our recovery also shows the resiliency of our industry, right? Although we did suffer a lot, especially in 2021, when maybe other segments of travel found ways to pick up and people were still traveling, despite restrictions or within the bounds of restrictions allowed for certain amounts of travel. Student travel was a lot more limited, right? Like I can say it's okay for me and my family to get a COVID test, but I can't require 100 students to get 6 COVID tests to go on a trip.
Right.
And even into 2023 and 24, 23 and 24 were both years that basically showed us continue that trend and reach and beat in some segments 2019 numbers. And I think everyone in the travel industry is going to be continue talking about 2019 numbers for a while. I know there's a little bit of exhaustion in that, but it's still important to sort of see what it looks like.
Yeah. So at the risk of jinxing anything, do you have a sense industry-wide, or you could even speak just for your company, what you're expecting in 25 and 26? Do you think that growth continues? Is there some plateau coming up? Are there external factors that could influence that growth trajectory?
Absolutely. So 24, everyone felt like domestic or local travel was kind of at a satiation point. It felt like we were kind of sit there, but international travel was going to grow significantly. That recovery has still not hit those past numbers. And I think part of that's also the rules and restrictions around international travel, whether they were legal rules or federal rules or other countries' rules or just school rules, were not lifted at the same pace, right? It was a lot more comfortable to say, hey, it's okay to go down to DC, but getting on a plane and going to France, I don't know what's going to happen. We don't have the time to review that legally from an administrative point of view. Let's just say no.
Yeah.
I think that was an expectation. I do think 25 from our end, and I think from what I'm hearing, industry and our research should be out in another month or two. We have the data is in the process of being crunched as the numbers people do it. But I think that 25 is feeling a little bit flat to 24, which I think industry-wide we are all pretty comfortable with because everyone had such a great year, 24. 26 is feeling a lot more appealing. Now, from the student perspective, I think that's a little bit different than maybe industry-wide because that's driven by the high school cycle, especially in North America. So in 26, the seniors are going to be students that were freshmen in 2022, which means that's the year when a lot more students were back in school. So that idea and that appetite for travel was a conversation piece that started at freshman year, and now it's sort of culminating. Versus this year, we have a lot of kids that did a lot of school on Zoom and maybe didn't develop that same appetite for it. I think in terms of industry risks, look, we run into the same risks that we always have. Currency fluctuations. What does that mean? Flight costs. What do political setups mean between countries for how many flights are running there? How safe will it be? What warnings are we going to get from the State Department about certain countries? That's always going to be something that we look at. Along with, I mean, not COVID necessarily, but all sorts of diseases, right? Like the CDC advises on regions all the time. Does that mean that region is going to take a hit on travel? When Zika came out, we had hits in those regions. Travel's seen, COVID's the one that everyone in the world felt. We feel every single one, right? And then economically, right? I think, like I said, the resiliency of the industry is that we will travel, not necessarily a resiliency on price, right? I think there's been a lot more pushback in 25 on pricing than we saw in 22, 23, and 24. And I think some of that was there was this burning need to travel no matter the cost, and there was an understanding that travel is getting expensive, and that's okay. Whereas now I think that there's been a lot more pushback, like, do we want to spend that much money on a trip? What else? What other costs are coming? And I think there's just an adjustment. We've always been a very price sensitive industry. And I think it's just a back to norm in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So that price sensitivity is one of those distinguishing characteristics that is probably unique to student travel in a way that doesn't apply as much to, the senior adult groups or other, kind of general market group travel. I'm curious if there are some other really key differences between what your colleagues who run adult tour companies do in their operations or their sales or things like that, and what you do with students and serving their families and schools and so forth.
I could go on about this. So I think there's a couple of big things I think to think about, which are the types of activities sometimes have to be shifted. The other thing is how many activities are you doing in a day and how filled are your days? I think when you have adult groups, you kind of have a little bit more luxury with being able to play with, you have some free time to explore the city, right? That's a lot less allowed. We prefer a lot more structured time. You want to keep the kids busy. You want to keep them out of trouble, right?
Yeah.
And you want to tire them out. We don't want kids. We don't want kids at the end of the night who did nothing all day and now have this burst of energy at 10 o'clock at night and want to run amok in a hotel.
Right.
Other things, like the types of hotels we use, interior corridors, right? Big thing. Every student travel company I talk to, anywhere in the world, the corridors are like a conversation piece for us, right? Mm-hmm. And so many hotels we've talked to that said, we have exterior corridors, but we have security guards, we have cameras. And given the option, every school would still prefer interior corridors. It's easier to chaperone, it's easier to monitor. It's just a default thought process. Another big thing is food. I think food is something that maybe adult travelers prioritize a little bit more on their trips. We have a mix, right? I have student groups that are culinary focused. We're doing cooking classes. They really want to get into local meals. And we have student groups that are like, we want to eat, so they're fed, and we want to get them on the road doing stuff, But I think really understanding that. I think the programmatic aspect of our trips also can be pretty different. I think there are themed trips that you do a lot with adult tours, but not necessarily tied to a year-long curriculum, right? Maybe I'm going to explore the churches in Italy, right? Mm-hmm. And I want to see them and I want to see the history and I want to learn about it while I'm there. But our trips are often supplemented with classroom work that's done beforehand, right? So they're not just walking in to be taught there, they're being taught and led by those teachers. The last part I want to touch on this is when we're doing groups, a lot of times it's a teacher-led or school-led trip, which means that's our main point of contact. And in a lot of ways, that's our decision maker in terms of the content of the trip and a lot of the rules around what can and can't be done. When you're doing adult tours, a lot of times you're putting everybody, you are that leader, right? You are saying, this is what the trip is. This is what's expectations from everybody. We're kind of acquiescing that responsibility, saying, hey, we follow what your school guidelines are, right? Mm-hmm. Like if your school says no water activities are allowed, no water activities are allowed, right? That I think is a pretty big difference in terms of the sales process. In a way where we kind of have a B2B feel versus a B2C feel. It's got pluses and minuses, right? Like I don't have 100 kids on my trip calling me saying, can I adjust this for my one room?
Right.
Downside, I have one person and then all those people may still send me emails complaining and I still have to go back to that one person to figure out how to communicate.
Yeah, that's tricky. So if I were to go on some game show like Family Feud and they asked, Brian, can you name the top 5 student travel destinations in North America? I feel like I know what I would guess. I think there's a perception among a lot of people in travel that, there's a handful, there's 5, 10, whatever destinations that all the student groups go to. And if you're not in those top 5, top 10, you don't have much of a chance of getting that group business. Would I be badly mistaken to hold that belief?
Yes, you would. And I think it's important to know that we like adult tours have our top destinations, right? And I think that's asking that to not be the case it's not a move that makes sense. DC is a destination that's always going to be in the top 3 of destinations that we take student groups to. DC is a major, U.S. history is a major portion of curriculum, right? And that exposure to DC at that age, I think, is important. And there's a new batch of them every year, right? And a new batch of them that have never been to DC, so we have to take them to DC. That being said, the second-tier cities, the secondary markets, they're all growing, I think, both in the adult travel space as well as in the student travel space. That comes from a lot of different factors. One, an uptick in maybe the number of trips that students are going on, whereas, 30 years ago, maybe you went on 2 trips in your entire student career, right? You went on an 8th grade DC trip, and you went on a senior trip or a music trip or a foreign language trip, and that was it. And now we're seeing this plugged in a lot more. We see grade-wise trips starting from 7th grade all the way up. Every year, there's a destination that they take the entire student body to. So now you have a lot more trips to work with, which means a lot more destinations to start thinking about. Also, a big part of student travel is music and college campuses, right? And those exist everywhere, right? So music festivals, music competitions, performing. We did a southern tour of the U.S. last year to awesome places. We were in Asheville, North Carolina. We were outside. We were in Knoxville, Tennessee, along with Nashville. We were hitting all these other cities. And the music director was like, "Look, I have an inner city school in Philadelphia. These kids need to know what music is like across the country, right? And music is something that we can agree is created across the country in lots of different ways. There's challenges with running trips like that, but there's huge advantages. And if you find the schools that are willing to explore different destinations, I think the rewards are immeasurable. The other thing is campuses, right? There's colleges all over the country, and we do so many campus tours, first-time college goers, or just senior tours, junior tours to see potential college campuses as part of school trips. And I think those exist all over the country. And every time those trips aren't just we pop into the campus and we go back to the hotel, right? There's always, what else are we doing while we're there? How do they get a feel of what it actually feels like if they were to go to college here? What does that look like? Sometimes that's a focus on food. We did this cool tour down in Memphis where it's just eating their way through Memphis and looking at colleges, right? So yeah, I think internationally, same thing, right? And you have to remember the student travel market, like it's a broad concept, right? When a lot of people kind of put that into like whatever their first thought is, the first time I say it, a lot of people say like, "Oh, you plan spring break trips or colleges." I'm like, I exclusively do not. Though that does fall under student travel, it's not really what our industry is focused on. That to me still falls more under leisure. But high school trips, college trips, and high schools range from, Title I low-income schools to independent schools where they have charters and endowments that allow for huge amounts of travel. We have student bodies that differ in economic ranges. We work with independent schools where they want to go to France, but they know the kids are going to go to Paris with their families, so they don't want to go there. Where else can they go, right? Yeah. What else can they see to see real France? And then it really becomes, I know a group doing a Formula One tour to Italy, going to factories. We're not working with that one, but there's ways to really focus on different parts of the world.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So if I were a destination executive, in charge of trying to drive more traffic to my hometown, what are some things that I should do to make myself more attractive to the student group market? Is it new product I have to develop, or are there ways that I can just leverage my existing product and, build relationships with people like you and start that process without, having to spend millions and millions of dollars trying to, bring new attractions to town?
I don't think you don't need to do that. I think a lot of the things we run into when thinking about new destinations that aren't necessarily used to hosting student groups is student groups tend to be on the larger side. What that means is we need a place to feed them, right? Hotel properties that have enough rooms to fit all the kids, breakfast rooms that have enough space so that we can get breakfast, restaurants that can fit 50, 100, 150 kids, when you go into some of these smaller cities, they're just not equipped for that. Or the destinations that they do have equipped for that are just priced too high, right? I know the price sensitivity of student groups is something that I feel like people that don't work with us get very turned off by. But the thing you have to remember about us is we bring volume,
Mm.
and we don't need you to discount everything. We need you to work with us to create something that works both in your price range and our price range, right? If you sell dinners at $50 a head and I have a $35 budget for dinner, what can we do to the menu, right? Like I'm gonna fill up 100 seats. Let's create a custom menu. Work with me on that.
Yeah.
Your ticket entrance price is $120. I'm gonna bring 200 kids there, right? I only have $80 budgeted for it, but maybe we limit the time that they're there. Maybe work with us. Maybe there's
Yeah.
certain days where you can do that where you're slower, right? Just give us a window where like these are the student travel days. Give us youth prices on those days. Those are big things. I mean, I think in terms of attractions, look, your city is beautiful. I think that of almost every place I go. I say almost because I'm sure there's one that I'm forgetting where I had a really bad experience, but
Yeah.
Your city is beautiful. Your culture is beautiful. We're there to experience that. We're not trying to say, hey, we're here now, come cater what we see back home, right? We want to see what your city is. And maybe that is, you guys don't do hotels larger than 10 rooms, and we need to work around that. Like, we're willing, like, students are very flexible. I know it's a long time ago for you and me, Brian, but
Right.
It's easy to get kids to work with something as long as it's communicated, right? As long as there's like, okay, we're camping or we're going to be split across 4 properties. We need to chaperone for that. That's fine. We need to budget for it. We need to think about who we're bringing in, how to separate those kids. But it's all doable. It's just a matter of wanting that kind of flow of business. And then it's just about selling the city the same way you'd sell it to anybody else, right? Like, you're coming here for X, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. Now, you've told me before that there's been quite significant growth in the past few years in the number of companies that are offering student trips. I'm curious why you think that is, what's driving that growth, and if you think there is still some margin, if there's still opportunities for new travel entrepreneurs to say, hey, I can make my way in this segment and make a real go of it.
So I think what is interesting about schools is that maybe is a little bit distant from leisure travel, is that they are community, right? A school is a center of a community. That's where your children go and get educated. That's where they make friends. Those parents are your friends.
Yeah.
What that means is when they make decisions, it's not just about what is best for them. It's what works for their community. And one of the reasons I think so many student tour operators have picked up over the last 20, 25 years is as each of those communities start to build more and more robust travel programs, they want to work with someone within their community. And if not someone within their community, somebody who understands their community.
Yeah.
And that localization, I think, is something that you don't necessarily have. Look, when I'm going to use the safari example again. If I'm going on safari, I don't necessarily I may take a recommendation from the person I know on where he went on safari, but I don't need that safari operator to be my neighbor, right?
Yeah.
I need him to be good over there, he's got to know his destination. I think with schools, a lot of times they're looking for someone that understands them, their community, wants to be flexible and work with them, wants to sit and listen to the stories, right? Like when something happens, I mean, we'll have all sorts of things happen that we hear about from schools. Tragic things, wonderful things, and all of those change and redefine what their travel program could be. And being willing to work with that and understand that is something that, a big company may not do because it doesn't really scale in the same sense, right?
Yeah.
If the school if the marching band got nominated to perform at St. Patrick's Day Parade in New York City, that's going to change the rest of the travel because those marching band students are going to go there now, which means other trips are going to lose those students or be canceled outright. Are you willing to be flexible on that, right? Are you willing to move dates? And that's the kind of thing that they're looking for. I touched on this a little bit earlier, but the student travel industry is a wild range of different things. Sports travel is something I do very little of, but it's a huge segment. Study abroad programs for colleges, huge segment. We don't really do it, but lots of other companies do. Gap year programs, another thing that is a place where student travel is very focused, but it's its own segment. So I think this combination of finding that segment that you connect with and the localization around the communities that you connect with. It doesn't necessarily need to be where you are physically, but a community that you really connect with their mission and how to empower that mission. I think it means that there's always going to be room in this space for up and coming people to focus on that. Programming keeps changing. Right now, sustainable travel has been a big trend, I think, in the student travel space, which leads to the leisure travel space. I think service travel is not what it used to be, but 30 years ago, that was a big trend, right? So those trends keep coming and attaching to communities that have different missions as new and important new ways of travel and new ways to focus on different parts and segments of travel. There'll be space for plenty of people. Yeah. But no one should join because that's more competition for me and I don't want it. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, absolutely. Now that makes a lot of sense. So what is the best way for people to connect with you, learn more about you, or say follow some of the research work you're doing for SIDA?
Connect with SIDA. SIDA is a great organization. We have been doing this business barometer for a while now. We're also launching our student digest, which is going to be, we run that study about every 10 years, give or take. The business barometer is very focused on trade industry. So we tour operator companies, suppliers, and getting information about what they see. The student digest is a much larger survey we send out to parents, teachers, former students, administrators that get a much more in-depth perspective from their end about travel. It also touches to one thing I didn't mention here is, about half the student travel industry in terms of money spent is directly with schools. They don't go through tour operators at all. It's another reason why there's so much opportunity because, can you price competitively against that, or can you provide a service that makes sense for them to use you versus doing it on their own? But yeah, we're launching the personal digest, which will be huge, and I think touching and ways to reach me. I don't know. Just email me. I'm always around chat.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. We will link to those resources in the show notes, and I'm sure people will take you up on that. So before I let you go, we have some questions we ask everybody, and these are just for fun. So no pressure. Just answer off the top of your head. When you book travel for you, are you going to choose a window seat or an aisle seat?
Ooh, depends on the length of the flight. Generally window.
Yeah. Yeah. Is a window better on a longer trip or better on a shorter trip?
Longer.
Yeah. Like
shorter, I want to get out as quickly as possible. Longer, I can lean on the edge. Also, I'm a kid at the airport, man. I get excited looking at planes. I get excited looking out the window. It's still magical to me.
It sure is. Yeah, I love that too. So what's one thing in your carry-on that you wouldn't travel without?
My passport. I actually I try to travel light, but I also try not to have too much. I think one of the things I love about travel is that if I'm getting on a plane, I'm getting off in a place where there are Cubans living there. So whatever I need to live, there'll be a way to get something. So I don't worry about it too much. But the passport's annoying when it's not there.
To say the least, right? For sure. That makes sense. Okay, so if you had a free airline pass and a week with nothing else to do, where would you be headed next?
This list is so long. I haven't been back to Japan in a while. I really want to go there, but I'm thinking, well, see, this is tricky because the airline pass may get me there, but the cost of doing things there is not covered, right? My mom's been dying to go gorilla trekking, and so I really want to take her to Rwanda soon and go gorilla trekking with her. But the airline pass wouldn't cover the cost, so I don't know if that's
You know what? We can throw in a couple $1,000 spending money as long as I'm just making up reality, right?
Yeah, that would probably be the first one I'd want to get to.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm hearing so many people right now talk about Japan and wanting to go to Japan, and I haven't been either. So I would take that opportunity myself. Last question. What is one thing you have seen or done on the road that you wish you could go back and experience again with somebody you love?
Oh man, so many things. Probably the man, yeah, toss up. Probably the top of Kilimanjaro. The journey is arduous, but I think the summit, like the peak of summiting Kilimanjaro, was quite incredible. The way the sun rises over the horizon, and just being on a glacier in the middle of Africa, and just so much has been written about that mountain, and in so many different cultures have touched it, and it's touched. I think that's probably one I would love to do again.
Yeah.
Without maybe without all the work, the 6 days of climbing it takes to get there, but yeah.
Yeah. What an amazing experience. I'm envious of that for sure. Gaurav, thanks for spending some time with us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us for this interview. I want to let you know that conversations like this are just part of what you will hear if you tune into a full episode of the Gather and Go podcast. When you listen, you'll get travel news you may not hear anywhere else, along with some really helpful road tips, some smart analysis, and maybe even a hot take from me about issues that are impacting travel right now. Now, you can hear this full episode along with many others by searching for Gather and Go in your favorite podcast player, or you can click on the link right below this video or one of the videos right here to my side. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.